Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. My name is Felicia and today we are going to run through some jobs that you can do on a film set. Mostly because I've done some really serious videos lately that have been kind of dry and boring and I've run out of ideas. But let's get started so I don't make this another 20-minute long video. We're going to start with the production office, which is where things start happening, where the ball starts rolling, where everything is organized, hopefully. So you have the producer or the executive producer, two different roles. There's a lot of different facets to producing. So you can have the exec producer or a production assistant or a production manager or a line producer. They all have slightly different roles, but generally the gist of it is they get the money and they are a tie between the set and the production office. So usually the producer or the executive producer will be running the show and they'll be getting the dollars, getting the people involved, all of that schmozzle. Sometimes a production manager will be put in charge of getting the crew or getting everybody together for the job. And then you can also have a line producer who is pretty much the tie between set and production office. And depending on your level of production, you'll either have all of those or some of those or none of those if you're really unorganized. And then in addition to that, you also have the production assistants, the runners, people like that who just bend to the every whim of the producers and generally everybody else. They're just there to be doing the legwork, to be running around and getting this and getting that, or if they're asked by production to go print some things and take it to set. There's a variety of different things you can do within a production assistant role or a runner role. And production assistants and runners are often the hardest working people on the set, really. They're always doing something. And then to finish it off, you have lawyers, accountants, secretaries, people like that. See, you don't need to go to film school to work in film, although it does help. Let's move into the jobs on set. So you have unit, usually comprising of a manager and then a couple of hands to help set up unit. They're the people who drive the buses, who make sure the crew get from point A to point B, who set up unit base. So they set up all the marquees and tents and trucks and everything. And yeah, that's generally their job. They're usually the first there in the morning and the last to leave. So it is really hard yakka. You also have catering, those lovely people who feed you the delicious food every day. Well, you would hope that the food is good. I have seen some really bad examples of catering in the past, and I've experienced them a few times, but luckily for me, I haven't experienced a lot of them, so let's hope that doesn't change.
That's lunch!
Next up, we have locations. That's usually comprised of a manager and an assistant, maybe just a manager. Now that person is responsible for the location that you're shooting in. So if you have any questions about where you are shooting, you usually go to them. And then you have a safety officer. They're obviously responsible for safety on set, and depending on the size of the crew, you might have multiple. They would be the people you go to if you had any safety concerns concerning the whole crew. And then you have the nurse, the nicest person on set, who will often be handing out water or making sure that everybody is okay, and if somebody does get hurt, they'll be tending to them. Okay, so let's get into the story stuff. So on top of there, you'd have the director. They're on board usually from the very beginning, and they usually work with the scriptwriter, with the producer, with everybody, and they have to know every single facet of film, or at least have a jack of all trades sort of knowledge of each facet of film. It's also the role that everybody seems to think that I do when I tell them I work in film. You then have actors, self-explanatory. You'll also have a scriptwriter or scriptwriters. Sometimes it'll be a team, depending on how big the project is, and they'll obviously be writing the script. Sometimes the director will also have input into the script, not all the time, but sometimes they do. You also have storyboard artists, which is pretty self-explanatory. They're people who draw storyboards for the script, sort of showing how it's going to be laid out on camera, or what you're going to work to on the day. Then you have a script supervisor or continuity, and they're responsible for making sure that everything stays the same per shot and per scene. So if an actor is in scene 1 and then scene 7, but they have the same costume in both scenes, they just make sure that everything looks as it does in scene 1. How the clothing looks, how they're wearing their clothing, their makeup choices, if they've got any scratches, scars, bruising, whatever, they make sure that all of that looks exactly how it did in the first scene. I didn't really write these in any particular order, so the next one's kind of out of place, but casting director. They are responsible for getting the actors. Then you have the first, second, third AD. They're responsible for keeping everything on time. Usually the first AD is the one who pushes everything along and makes sure the scheduling is correct, and then the second AD and third AD are assisting to that. And then you have the director's assistant, who is the director's assistant, completely different to the first AD. All right, now we're up to my department, the camera department. So we're going to start with the DP, or the cinematographer. They're responsible for the overall look of the image. They do follow what the director says, and they try and make what the director says a reality. It's a collaborative process. You could then have a camera operator, so the DP doesn't necessarily need to be operating the camera. They can designate a camera operator. This often happens in the US, doesn't really happen in Australia. Sometimes it does, but in most cases it doesn't. Usually the DP is manning a camera, and then if there is a B camera, there'll be a B camera operator. Then you have the first AC, or the focus puller, and they're responsible for pulling focus and also for maintaining and building the camera gear. They're also responsible for everything in the camera kit. So they need to make sure that everything is maintained, kept well, and checked before the shoot. And then you have second AC, or clapper loader. Now this role is a little bit of an outdated term because not a lot of people shoot on film anymore, but that person is responsible for maintaining the camera as well as the first AC. They're also responsible for changing cards, loading film, loader, and also using the slate. They could also be responsible for charging batteries. It depends on how big the job is. The larger the scale of the job, the less responsibility is put on the second AC, and the more responsibility is spread out over the whole department.
Ravioli, zucchini, parmigiana, take 7.
And then you have vid split, or video split. Now they are responsible for setting up Video Village. They are responsible for setting up the monitors and making sure they're working ASAP as soon as you're ready to start shooting. They could also be responsible for charging batteries, or even assisting the second ACs in swinging batteries or keeping track of things like cards, or even just generally helping by running back to the truck and grabbing something. And then you have DIT and data. Now that is a role that is very, very important. On smaller jobs, sometimes the second AC will be responsible for doing data. If you had seen my previous video, you'll know all about that. But DIT is more than just looking at footage or saving and storing footage. It's actually a little bit more complicated than that. A part of DIT is also scrubbing through footage and making sure things are going to work. So if the DP has a shot that they're not sure if it is going to work, you could go back, have a look at that for them, make sure it is, and if it isn't, you can go back and tell them, hey, we might need to reshoot XYZ. Onwards to grips and electrics. So you have the key grip, who is head of the grip department, and they are responsible for moving things from point A to point B. Now, if there is multiple cameras, you'll have more assistance in this as well. Usually they're paired with one other person so that they can lift things more easily and it's not going to be too much strain on them. But if there is more than one camera, there will be a whole team of grips. They're responsible for car rigs, for dollies, for cranes. They're also responsible for carrying the tripod or the camera from one spot to another spot. They're very, very helpful people. And then you have the gaffer, or the head gaffer, who will be responsible for the lighting department. They'll also have a team with them as well, so they might have a couple of other gaffers depending on the scale of the job. And then they'll also have a best boy, who is the assistant to those people. And then we have art department, the people who tie everything together. So you have a set decorator, an art director who's responsible and sort of the umbrella overhead of everything. You'll have a bunch of assistants. You'll have buyers as well, people who go out and buy the props. You'll have a props master who's responsible for keeping track of all those props and which props go out to what scene. And then you'll also have standby props, who's kind of the assistant to them. There's lots of hierarchy in film, and if you're starting out in film, you need to follow that hierarchy. Following on from art direction, you also have costume. They are responsible for the costumes. You usually have a costume designer who will oversee everything with the director and make sure everything is to their liking. And then you'll have a bunch of people working on actually making those pieces or buying those pieces. And then you'll also have people on set who make sure that everything is going to plan and looks as it should. You've got designers, you've got dressmakers, and then you've also got assistants. Hierarchy. Hair and makeup. Those people are amazing. You'll have hair and makeup artists and assistants. Sometimes you'll have specific people for special effects makeup or specific people for specific actors on set. It can vary depending on the scale of the job. Again, you'll have a whole team or one or two. And then we have sound. So you'll have a sound designer who's responsible for the overall feeling of the sound that is in there. They may also be post-mixing, or they may have somebody separate for mixing in post. You'll have a location sound recordist who will be responsible for mixing on set. You'll also have some boom swingers, a composer for all of the music, Foley artists who are responsible for recording any sound effects that might be needed in post, people responsible for ADR or automatic dialogue replacement, which is pretty much re-recording what is said by an actor in a studio setting and then placing that on top. Very hard to do. So yeah, a fairly big team. And then in editing, you usually have a senior editor and then maybe a few more editors on top of that, depending on how big the project is. And then sometimes an assistant editor to do all of the assembly work. A very small one, but still important one, publicity, which usually consists of one or two people running the publicity of that film or of that show. And then they also hire a stills photographer to take stills on the day so that they can use those for promotion. And then we have stunts. So you'll have a stunt coordinator who works with a team of performers or stand-ins or body doubles who will perform those stunts for the actors, or be extras in the backgrounds of fight scenes, or be drivers of stunt performing cars. There's lots of different facets to the stunt world. And finally, we have special effects and visual effects. So special effects are practical effects that happen on set. So explosions, rubble, stuff like that. And then visual effects are anything that's done in post-production. So in there you'll have a bunch of supervisors or one supervisor who will oversee everything. You could have specific artists for specific programs or for specific sections. Like one person could be doing color, one person could be doing the general layout, one person could be doing the mechanics. Like there's all different facets of that. You could have animators as well, and then assistants on top of that. So yeah, as you can see, there's a lot of different roles in film, not just directing. And now you can go through the credits of a film, that part at the end of the film where usually people leave. Yeah, you could go through that and be like, I know what that person does. This is not everything as well. Like, there's a lot more to film than what I've said today. But then that video would be way too long for you and you'd find it way too boring. But if you are interested in film and some of these job ideas have maybe triggered something in your brain and you would like to be involved, I'd highly recommend it. It's a really great industry, as hard as it can be to work in. So yeah, hopefully you enjoyed that video. If you did, please remember to give it a big fat thumbs up. And if you would like to see more of my face and learn a little bit more about filmmaking in the process, remember to subscribe, and I'll see you next Sunday. Also, thank you very much for 300 subscribers. It just happened right before Christmas, and I am very grateful for every single one of you. So welcome to the new subscribers, and thank you for coming on board. Bye.